Hi, Pastor Vince with Clergy in Support of the Second Amendment. Today I want to talk to you about an extremely deceptive news article that appeared recently in an Oklahoma newspaper. And I want to do that because if we look at how this article was written, we can see a great deal about, number one, how deceptive our opponents are, and number two, the tactics that they use. And it gives us an opportunity to explain these things to other people. So that's the goal here. Just to take this article apart, to show you where it's nothing but propaganda, so that you can spot the same tactics when you see them. Now, let me start out with a preface. And that is that when it comes to constitutional carry, there are two aspects. First of all, there's a constitutional aspect. Is the right to carry something that should not require a permit or a permission slip from the government? I believe that. I believe that the Second Amendment should be your carry permit. That should be it. The Supreme Court disagrees with me and probably with many of you on this issue, but that's where we are. Thank God that they've said we have a presumptive right to a permit now. Can't be denied just because. That's a great thing. But there's a whole other angle to this, and that is the practical aspect. Does permitless carry, as many allege, is it the cause of increased crime and murders? Not associated with, but is it the cause of these things? Now, at this point, if we're going to be honest, we do not have the data that we do for licensed concealed carry. That's been around for about 35 years. We've got tons of data. We haven't got that much data when it comes to permitless carry or constitutional carry because simply, other than Vermont, we haven't had it for very long. And Vermont's a fairly low population state. So, with those two provisos, let us continue. Let's look at the article. Just 44 days on the job, Governor Kevin, and I hope I pronounced this correct, Stitt, signed his first bill as governor, which allowed Oklahomans over the age of 21 to carry a gun without a permit or training. Oh, that sounds dangerous, doesn't it? During the ceremony to sign the so-called permitless carry bill, what do you mean so-called? That's exactly what it was. Stitt said it would expand the rights of Oklahomans while making the state safer against gun violence. There shouldn't be any uptick in violence, said Stitt, who was flanked by more than a dozen lawmakers there to show their support. Since November 1st, 2019, when the permitless carry law went into effect, Stitt's prediction has not come true. Gun deaths, notice that, gun deaths in Oklahoma have increased since the new law went into effect, as the state has recorded some of its deadliest months in history, according to an analysis of state medical examiner data by the Oklahoman. Wow! If you read just that far, which is probably farther than a lot of people would read this article, then it sounds like this new law has caused murders to skyrocket. Let's look at it, because it hasn't. None of that is true. It's all a lie. It's all deception. We get our first clue toward this deception a full 7 paragraphs in, when we read this. Whether the state's permit carryless law directly contributed to a rise in gun violence is difficult to determine. Boy, it didn't sound like that just a few paragraphs before, did it? But as Oklahoma lawmakers have increased access to firearms over the past decade, which they really haven't, firearms-caused suicides, accidents, and homicides in the state have increased. Now listen to this next part. While the state's gun-caused murder rate, you notice gun-caused, not gun-involved, gun-caused. The guns caused the problem, not the people. The state's gun-caused murder rate has increased over the past decade. More than 2/3 of all firearms deaths since 2010 have been suicides. Oh, wow. So their numbers lumped together: suicides, homicides, justifiable homicides, and accidents, and any other firearms-related death, all in one big bunch. That doesn't sound good to me. Let's continue to look at this. Well, first of all, 2/3 are suicides. Suicides are terrible. They're a tragedy. As a paramedic, I went to many of them, both attempted and both ones that were, in fact, suicides. I've had to stand there with family members waiting for law enforcement to show up. I know what suicide's like. But firearms are not the cause of suicide, but they are used in suicides. However, if we compare the firearms ownership rates and suicide rates of various nations, one thing becomes crystal clear. There is absolutely no relationship between the suicide rate and the gun ownership rate. More guns does not equal more suicides. In fact, there are nations out there with either virtual or actual firearms bans that have suicide rates more than double what the United States has. But what about, as our friends in the gun control movements are so fond of saying, what about the industrialized nations of the West? Well, how about we look at them, and just them? Just industrialized nations. We're going to focus primarily on Europe and other Western nations. Well, the United States has more guns than people. We have 120 guns for every 100 residents. So, yeah, more guns than people. Probably more than that. And yet, we have one of the lowest suicide rates on the list. Boy, they didn't tell us that, did they? In fact, our suicide rate is about 1/3 that of Finland, Austria, Norway, and Iceland. It's about half that of France, Sweden, New Zealand, and Germany. And basically these countries, most of them, have a gun ownership rate less than 1/10 of what the United States has. Yet people are killing themselves at 2 to 3 times the rate that they're doing it in the United States. So please, don't try and tell me that suicides are caused by a high firearms ownership rate. It simply isn't true. Funny how they never mention this in the article. Furthermore, what in the world does permitless carry have to do with suicides, which are predominantly carried out in the home? And even if they aren't, somebody's going to kill themselves is not worried about, oh my gosh, I'm going to violate the law. I don't have a permit to carry this gun to where I'm going to kill myself. That's how absurd this is, to blame permitless carry for suicides. So by their own admission, we've just eliminated 2/3 of their gun death figure. See, they love suicides for one simple reason. If they lump suicides and all other gun-related deaths together, because when guns are around, yes, they'll be used for suicide. They can come up with a gun death figure that is always higher in an area where guns are more common. And that's what they want to prove. What they will never do is just talk about the gun murder rate, or, for Pete's sake, the overall murder rate, as if they might care about somebody who dies and is killed and is murdered with something other than a gun. See, that murder rate might be lower. In fact, it is in a lot of states. But let's go on. Let's look at their medical examiner data and consider what they did. How deceptive were they? Well, they had a great deal of the data. The medical examiner is going to come up with a cause of death, whether it's homicide, suicide, whatever. They had that data. They could have broken it down and put it in the article. What they couldn't get as far as justifiable homicides, they're a newspaper. They could have searched their own archives and Nexus, which gives them access to all the news in the nation, let alone just in Oklahoma. They could have searched that and they could have matched up the homicides to see whether or not they were murders or justifiable. They didn't do that. They didn't give us that information. Now, why wouldn't they do that? They wouldn't do it because if they did, it'd destroy their case. That's why. Now, of course, one of the things we need to think about here, and it should be obvious, is that justifiable homicides, suicides, murders, accidents, they all have vastly different causes. And that's one of the points you should make to your friends you're trying to expose this deception to, is that these are vastly different causes of these things. They want us to believe that guns cause all of them. If there were no guns, there would be no murders, because there was never a murder before there was a gun. Okay, what happens when we just look at the murder rates? Well, I did that. First of all, murder rates have been going up everywhere. If you don't believe me, believe the Washington Post. Not just in states that passed constitutional carry. It's much more likely that the wave of constitutional carry that we have seen in the last few years is a result of rising murder rates, not the cause of the rising murder rates. Second of all, when we look at Oklahoma's murder rate, we see some very interesting things. And I did that. I went to the Oklahoma State Bureau of Investigation, and I looked at their stats. And when we look at it, we see that the murder rate began increasing in Oklahoma a full 2 years before constitutional carry was passed. 2 years. And additionally, the murder rate did not increase at any higher rate after it was passed. There was no spike as a result. You can see that on the chart I've got up here. And if anybody here seeing this video doesn't believe me, go to the Oklahoma State Bureau of Investigation website and look at the data for yourself. It's amazing that they didn't put any of that in the article. I found it. They could have too if they wanted to be honest and fair, but they don't want to be honest and fair. This article could have been written by Moms Demand Action or the Brady campaign. And I'll give you a clue. It probably was. Probably just reworked a press release and used that. Well, as you can see, this article is intentionally deceptive from beginning to end. Hopefully you'll be able to spot such deception in other articles by looking for some of the same tactics, because they use the same tactic over and over again, especially that gun murder or that gun death rate that they want everyone to assume is the gun murder rate when it isn't. That's my goal today. I hope I succeeded. Well, that's all I have for you today. Hope you'll take a moment to like, comment, and subscribe, because it really helps. And have a wonderful day. I will see you in the next video.